Around 11 at night, I was driving down Interstate 40 after a long shift at the distribution warehouse. The road stretched out endlessly before me, flanked on both sides by cornfields that seemed to reach the horizon. The radio played soft country music, keeping me company in the darkness. I had just left the small town of Millbrook about 15 miles back. 35 more miles and I would be home. My eyes felt a little tired, but I was still alert enough. Then suddenly, my headlights caught the figure of a man standing on the shoulder of the road. His thumb stuck out in the classic Hitchhiker pose. I slowed down, my foot easing off the gas pedal as I approached him. Part of me hesitated. Should I stop? The man looked to be in his early 50s, wearing an old denim jacket and jeans, with a small backpack slung over one shoulder. He was standing right under a sign that read Rest Area 12 miles. I thought about all the warnings my mother had given me about strangers. But then I also remembered the time my father had helped a stranded family on the side of the road. This was rural country. People still helped each other out here, right? I rolled down my window as I pulled up beside him. He stepped closer, and I asked where he needed to go. His voice was calm and polite as he explained that his car had broken down about 3 miles back. He just needed a ride to the next town so he could call a mechanic. His smile seemed genuine enough. After a moment of consideration, I unlocked the passenger door and let him in. He climbed into the passenger seat and set his backpack down by his feet. He introduced himself as Rick and said he was on his way to Memphis to visit his sister. He told me his tire had blown out on the highway and he did not have a spare with him. To make matters worse, his phone battery had died, so he could not call anyone for help. I shared that I was heading home after work, and we started talking about jobs and the weather. The conversation seemed normal at first. Rick asked what I did for a living and where I lived. I kept my answers vague, not giving away too many details about my exact address, but something about the way he asked those questions made me slightly uncomfortable. He kept pushing for more information, asking if I lived alone or with family. I started to feel a little uneasy, but told myself I was just being paranoid. Still, I could not shake the feeling that something was off. After about 5 miles, Rick asked if we could stop at the gas station coming up ahead. I said sure, I actually needed to fill up anyway. But as we got closer to the station, Rick suddenly changed his mind. "Skip this one," he said. "There is a better place up ahead." I found that strange because the station was clearly open with lights on and everything. I asked him why, and he claimed the gas prices here were too high. The next one would be cheaper. It did not sit right with me, but I kept driving. Rick went quiet for a moment, then started asking more unusual questions. "Do you usually drive alone this late at night? Does anyone know you are on your way home?" I gave short answers, my worry growing with each question. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror and noticed he was not looking out the window anymore. He was staring at the door locks. I looked down at his backpack and saw that the zipper was partially open. Rick then said, "Hey, instead of going to that town, could you turn onto County Road 7? It is closer." I knew County Road 7. It was a dirt road that went through isolated farmland with hardly any traffic. I told Rick I was not familiar with that road and would take him to the town as I had promised. Rick went silent. The air in the car became tense. He started shifting in his seat, his hand resting on top of his backpack. I tried to stay calm and pressed the accelerator a bit harder. Then Rick asked, "You do not trust me, do you?" I replied, "It is not that. I just want to get you somewhere safe where there is a public phone." He let out a strange laugh. "Safe? Who said I am not safe?" I saw in the rearview mirror that he was slowly unzipping his backpack. My heart started pounding and my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Up ahead, I saw a sign that read Rest Area 2 miles. I decided I would stop there. At least there would be lights, and possibly other people around. As we approached the rest area, Rick suddenly said, "Do not stop here." His voice was colder now, no longer polite like before. I said I needed to use the restroom and turned into the rest area anyway. Rick reached into his backpack. The rest area was almost completely empty except for a single semi-truck parked in the far corner. The overhead lights were dim and several bulbs were out. I parked near the restroom building but left the engine running. Rick asked, "What are you doing?" I said, "Just going to the restroom. You should get out too." Rick did not move. His hand stayed inside the backpack. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. His hand was gripping something inside that bag. Without thinking, I threw open my door and jumped out of the car. Rick opened his door and stepped out as well. That is when I saw it clearly. In his hand was a large knife. He was not hiding it anymore. He looked at me with completely different eyes. He said, "You should have listened to me." I backed away and screamed, "Help! Somebody help me!" Rick started walking toward me, but he did not run. He moved slowly as if he knew no one else was around. I ran toward the semi-truck and pounded on the door. Inside, a man jolted awake, startled by the noise. He rolled down his window and I shouted, "Call the police. That man has a knife." The truck driver looked toward Rick and immediately opened his door and stepped out. He was a big guy, over 6 feet tall, and he yelled, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Rick stopped in his tracks. He looked at both of us for a moment, then turned around and ran into the darkness beyond the rest area. The truck driver pulled out his phone and dialed 911. I was shaking uncontrollably as I explained what had happened. My car was still running with the doors wide open, but I was too scared to go near it. The truck driver, who told me his name was Mike, stayed with me until the police arrived. It felt like an eternity, though it was less than 8 minutes. When the police showed up, they took statements from both me and Mike. They searched my car and found a small wallet that had fallen under the passenger seat. It was not mine. Inside the wallet were several credit cards with different names on them, along with a photograph of a car that was not mine. The officer told me they had received multiple reports about a man named Rick operating in this area. He targeted lone drivers on empty highways. There had been 2 missing persons cases in the surrounding counties over the past 6 months. The police believed Rick had accomplices waiting at the locations he asked drivers to take him to. I was lucky I had not listened to him about turning onto County Road 7. The officer advised me to be more careful in the future and to never pick up strangers again. They promised to increase patrols and search for Rick. I called my family and told them everything that had happened. I thanked Mike for saving my life. He had been in the right place at the right time. From that night on, I never picked up hitchhikers again, no matter the circumstances. The lesson I learned was clear. Kindness needs to be balanced with caution. Sometimes the person asking for help is not the one who needs it, and sometimes trusting your gut feeling can save your life. I was 23 years old and in my final year as a pre-med student at a state university when this happened. It was a Wednesday night in October, and I had just gotten out of my organic chemistry lab at 9:45 p.m. The class was brutal, running almost 3 hours straight, and by the time I walked out of that building, I was exhausted. I grabbed my bike from the rack outside and started pedaling toward my dorm. The route took me through an older neighborhood between campus and the residential area where most students lived, about 2 miles total. The streets were dark, with only a few working streetlights, and several of the houses looked abandoned. I was about halfway home when I heard this grinding sound coming from my bike. The chain made a terrible clanking noise, then suddenly slipped off completely. I tried to fix it right there on the sidewalk, but the links were jammed in the gears. My phone was down to 15% battery, not enough to reliably call an Uber and have it last until I got home. I had no choice but to walk the rest of the way, wheeling my broken bike beside me. The neighborhood felt different on foot, more exposed. Every shadow seemed deeper, and I kept looking over my shoulder. I had been walking for about 3 blocks when I heard a car engine behind me moving slowly. I glanced back and saw an old black sedan with 3 or 4 guys inside. They were young, maybe my age or a bit older. The passenger side window rolled down and one of them shouted, "Yo, college boy, need a ride?" I shook my head and kept walking, picking up my pace. The car drove ahead of me, then stopped at the corner, blocking my path. They were laughing now and the driver leaned out. "What's wrong?" "Too good for us." I crossed to the other side of the street, pulling my bike with me. My heart was starting to pound. The sedan made a U-turn and came back, this time pulling up right next to me. One of them made a throwing motion like he was going to hurl a beer bottle at me, but nothing left his hand. They were just messing with me, trying to scare me. It was working. The car circled the block and came around a third time. This time they got even closer, the bass from their music so loud I could feel it in my chest. One of them yelled something I couldn't make out over the noise. I saw a 7-Eleven up ahead at the next intersection and decided to head for it. At least there would be lights and maybe other people around. I jogged into the parking lot of the convenience store, and the sedan slowed down but didn't follow me in. They just kept circling the block. I stood near the entrance, pretending to text someone, trying to look like I was waiting for a friend. That is when I noticed a white cargo van parked a few spaces away. It was really clean, almost spotless, with some faded company logo on the side I could not quite read. A man stepped out of the store carrying a bottle of water. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a button-down shirt and khaki pants, pretty normal looking. He noticed me standing there looking nervous and he walked over. "You okay, son? Those guys giving you trouble?" His voice sounded genuinely concerned. I nodded. "Yeah, my bike broke down and they have been following me for the past few blocks." He glanced toward the street where the black sedan was still visible at the corner. "That is not right. Where are you headed? I can give you a lift." I hesitated. Everything I had ever been taught told me not to get into cars with strangers. But then I looked at the sedan again, still idling at the end of the block, and I felt trapped. The man seemed to sense my hesitation. "I understand if you are cautious. I have a daughter about your age. I would want someone to help her if she was in trouble." That line got me. He seemed so sincere, so fatherly. I looked at his van again. It was clean, well-maintained, and he was dressed like someone coming home from an office job. "Okay," I said. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." He helped me load my bike into the back of the van, and I climbed into the passenger seat. The inside of the van was just as clean as the outside. It smelled faintly of cleaning solution, like he had just detailed it. There was not a single piece of trash anywhere. He started the engine and asked, "So where to?" I gave him directions. "Just straight down Maple Street for about a mile and a half. The dorms are on the left." But instead of going straight, he turned right onto a different street. I spoke up immediately. "Oh, that is the wrong way." He did not seem bothered. "I know a shortcut. There is construction on Maple, remember. This will be faster." I did not remember seeing any construction signs, but I also had been pretty focused on my broken bike and the guys harassing me. Maybe I just missed it. He started making small talk. "So what is your major?" "Pre-med," I told him. "Hopping to get into medical school next year." "That is impressive," he said. "Long night." "Yeah, organic chem, brutal class, goes until almost 10 p.m. Then he asked, "You live alone?" The question felt a little odd, but I answered anyway. "No, I have a roommate. Actually, he is probably wondering where I am right now." I pulled out my phone and texted Jake. "Bike broke down, getting a ride, be there in 10. Jake replied almost instantly. "K, you good?" "Yeah," I typed back. While I was texting, the man took another turn, this time to the left, onto an even darker street. I looked up from my phone and realized we were definitely not heading toward campus anymore. "Excuse me, I think we are going the wrong direction." He glanced at me. "Oh, my bad. Let me turn around up here." His tone was still casual, but something in my gut told me this was not right. Instead of turning around right away, he kept driving deeper into what looked like an industrial area. There were no houses here, just warehouses and empty lots. This really does not look like the way back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just turning around at the next lot," he replied. "Easier than making a U-turn on that narrow road." That made sense logically, but my heart was beating faster now. And then I smelled it. At first, it was so faint I thought I was imagining it. A weird, sweet, rotten smell. I frowned and tried to figure out where it was coming from. I glanced into the back of the van through the rearview mirror. There was a tarp covering the floor, a few cardboard boxes stacked neatly against one side. Nothing that looked out of place. But the smell kept getting stronger. It was sweet but also rancid, like meat that had gone bad mixed with something sickeningly sugary. I tried breathing through my mouth, but I could still taste it in the air. "Do you smell something?" I asked. He sniffed the air. "Smell like what?" "I do not know, something weird, kind of sweet but also really bad." He took another sniff. I do not really smell anything." "Maybe something in the air out here." industrial area and all. It was a reasonable explanation, but the smell was definitely coming from inside the van. I turned around in my seat and looked more carefully at the back. Everything was so clean, so organized. There was not a crumb, not a stain, nothing out of place. But the smell was getting worse by the second, almost overpowering now. It was so strong I had to pull my jacket up over my nose. Finally, he turned the van around and started heading back out of the industrial area. But instead of going back the way we came, he took yet another turn onto a different road. This was not the way to campus at all. I was starting to panic. "Sir, I really need to get back. I have an important meeting tomorrow morning." He looked at me. "Oh yeah, what kind of meeting?" "With my academic advisor," I said, trying to sound firm. "At 7:30 a.m. It is about my med school applications. I cannot miss it." I made sure to emphasize the exact time. He nodded slowly. "That is early. They will notice if you are not there." It was such a strange question. Why would he care if someone noticed? "Absolutely," I said. "She is very strict about punctuality. Plus, my roommate knows I have this meeting. He is going to wake me up at 6 a.m. I wanted him to know that people were expecting me, that I would be missed. Also, I need to text him when I get home. He is kind of protective after what happened to another student last semester." That last part was not true, but I hoped it would make him think twice. The man went quiet for a moment. The smell in the van was now so strong I thought I might throw up. I pulled my jacket tighter over my nose and mouth. "Are you sure you do not smell that?" I asked again. He sounded irritated this time. "Maybe I left something in the back. I do deliveries sometimes. Probably some food went bad." "But your van is so clean," I said. "I do not see anything back there." "I cleaned it out yesterday," he snapped. "Must have missed something." His answer did not make sense. If he cleaned the van yesterday, how could food smell this bad already? I pulled out my phone again and pretended to text, but really I opened my Maps app to check where we were. We were almost 4 miles from campus, heading in the completely wrong direction. The man must have noticed me looking at my phone because he finally turned the van in the right direction. He did not say anything, but I could see his jaw was clenched, his hands tight on the steering wheel. I sat perfectly still, one hand on the door handle, ready to jump out if I needed to. The smell was unbearable now. It reminded me of something from my biochemistry lab the week before. We had been working with samples of amines and sulfur compounds, and the professor had warned us about the smell of organic decay. This was different, but it had those same elements. That sickly sweet rot mixed with something sharp and chemical. And then it hit me. What if it was not food? What if there was something else in the back of this van? My mind raced. The van was too clean. The man had taken too many wrong turns. He had asked too many questions about my schedule, about whether anyone was waiting for me. And that smell, that horrible, unmistakable smell. I started shaking but tried to keep my face calm. I looked out the window and recognized the street we were on now. We were getting close to campus. "You can drop me off at the student union," I said quickly. "Right up here." He frowned. "I thought you said the dorms." "Yeah, but I just remembered I need to grab something from my lab. It is open 24/7. It was a lie, but I wanted to get out somewhere public, somewhere with lights and cameras and other people around. He hesitated, then nodded. "All right." He pulled up in front of the student union. There were still a few students walking around and the building was lit up bright. I opened the door fast. "Thanks for the ride." He just nodded, did not say anything. I went around to the back to get my bike, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the handles. As I pulled the bike out, I noticed the corner of the tarp in the back had flipped up slightly. Underneath, I saw a dark stain on the metal floor of the van. It could have been rust. It could have been paint. But in the glow of the streetlight, it looked an awful lot like dried blood. My heart stopped. The man noticed me staring. He quickly reached back and slammed the rear doors shut. "Take care, son," he said, and his voice was colder now. I stepped back, nodded, and pulled my bike toward the building as fast as I could. I did not look back until I was inside. When I finally turned around, the white van was already driving away. I did not get the license plate. It was too dark and I was too far away. I stood there in the student union lobby, my legs weak, my whole body shaking. I called Jake and told him everything. He told me to report it to campus police, but what would I even say? I had no evidence, just a bad smell and a feeling. I decided to head back to the dorm, but I made Jake stay on the phone with me the whole walk. I did not go anywhere alone for weeks after that. I could not stop thinking about that smell. 5 years later, I was doing a rotation at the hospital as part of my medical training. I was assigned to the forensic pathology department for 2 weeks. On my first day, they brought in a body that had been found in an apartment. The person had been dead for 4 days in the summer heat. When the medical examiner unzipped the body bag, the smell hit me like a freight train, and I froze. It was the exact same smell from the van that night. The same sickly sweet rot, the same chemical sharpness, the same suffocating heaviness in the air. It was the smell of human decomposition, unmistakable, unforgettable. I stood there, unable to move as the realization crashed over me. There had been a body in that van. The man who picked me up that night was not a good Samaritan helping a stranded student. He was a killer, and I had been sitting in that van with a corpse just a few feet behind me. The only thing that saved me was telling him about my schedule, the early morning meeting, the roommate who was waiting for me, the fact that I would be missed quickly. He knew I would be searched for right away, and that was the only reason he let me go. I got lucky. I walked away from death that night, and I have never forgotten it. Now, every time I smell that odor in my work, I am back in that van. Back in that moment when I realized how close I came to never making it home. I think about that man sometimes, wonder if he ever got caught, wonder how many others were not as lucky as I was. But I will never forget the night I accepted a ride from a stranger and lived to tell the story. I was 23 that summer, standing on the shoulder of Interstate 40 somewhere between Arizona and New Mexico with my thumb out and a backpack at my feet. The sun was dropping fast behind the mountains, painting the desert sky orange and purple. I just finished a camping trip with some friends who'd left that morning, but I wanted to stay one more night by myself. Big mistake. My car died about 15 miles back at the campground, battery completely dead. My phone was dead too. I had two choices: walk 15 miles in the dark through desert or try to hitch a ride to the nearest town and find a mechanic. Neither option was great, but at least hitchhiking might get me somewhere before the temperature dropped. Desert nights got cold fast. A few cars had already passed without stopping. A dark blue pickup truck slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder about 20 yards ahead of me. I grabbed my pack and jogged up to it. The driver leaned over and pushed open the passenger door. She was a woman, maybe in her early 40s, with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a faded gray tank top and ripped jeans. She smiled at me, but something about her eyes didn't match the smile. They were flat, cold. I hesitated for a second, but I figured a woman driver was probably safer than most alternatives. I climbed in. The cab smelled like stale cigarettes and something else, something heavier I couldn't place. Empty beer bottles rolled around on the floor. Fast food bags were stuffed in the door pockets. The dashboard was covered in a layer of dust. She looked over at me and said, "Where you headed?" Her voice was low and raspy, like she'd been smoking for decades. I told her about my car dying, how I just needed to get to the next town to find help. She nodded slowly and said, "No problem, honey. I'm heading that way anyway." She pulled back onto the highway. For the first 10 minutes, everything seemed normal enough. She asked me about the camping trip where I was from. I gave short answers, trying to be polite but not too chatty. Then she started talking more about her life, her ex-husband, her son. Her tone changed when she mentioned her son. The casual friendliness drained out of her voice and something bitter took its place. "He thinks he can just leave," she said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Just pack up and go like I'm nothing. Like I didn't raise him." Her knuckles went white on the wheel. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said something about how that must be hard. She laughed suddenly, a sharp sound that didn't match anything funny. "Yeah, it's hard, but people don't care about that, do they?" She glanced over at me, eyes lingering too long while the truck drifted slightly toward the center line. I said, "You should probably watch the road." She snapped her attention back and laughed again. Right, sorry." She asked me about my family, my job. I gave vague answers. In the rearview mirror, I noticed a large black duffel bag on the back seat. It looked heavy, sagging in the middle. There was something dark staining the bottom corner, almost like oil but not quite. I forced myself to look away and stare out the window instead. About 30 minutes into the drive, she pulled off at a small convenience store. The neon sign flickered weakly in the growing darkness. She said, "I need to grab cigarettes and a drink. Come inside with me." I told her I'd wait in the truck, but she shook her head firmly. "No, come on, don't want you getting any ideas." I didn't understand what she meant, but the way she said it made me uneasy. I climbed out and followed her inside. The store was nearly empty except for an older man behind the counter, maybe 60, with gray hair and glasses. She grabbed a pack of cigarettes and walked up to the register. The man rang it up and told her the price. She stared at him. "That's 50 cents more than last time." He explained calmly that prices had gone up. There was a new tax. She slammed her hand on the counter. "You're ripping me off. Everyone's always trying to rip me off." Her voice got louder. "You people are all the same, trying to squeeze every dollar out of everyone." The man stayed calm, repeated that it was just the tax. I stood a few feet behind her, frozen. She leaned forward and said, "I should burn this whole place down, teach you a lesson." The man's face went pale. She threw a handful of bills on the counter, grabbed the cigarettes, and walked out. I mumbled an apology to the man and hurried after her. Outside, she muttered to herself as she unlocked the truck, "These people think they can treat me like trash. They don't know who they're dealing with." We got back in and she pulled onto the highway again, but this time she was driving faster. Her hands were shaking slightly on the wheel. She wasn't talking to me anymore, just muttering under her breath. I caught fragments. "They all deserve it, every single one of them." I tried to stay quiet, but curiosity or fear made me ask, "Who?" She turned to look at me and her expression had changed completely. Her eyes were wide and unfocused. "People who think they're better than me. People who look down on me." I didn't respond. She laughed and reached down under her seat, pulling out a flask. She unscrewed it and took a long drink. The smell of whiskey filled the cab. The truck swerved slightly into the other lane before she corrected. I saw a road sign, "Next town 8 miles." She suddenly said, "You know what's in that bag back there?" My stomach dropped. I said I didn't know and didn't want to know. She smiled. "Good, keep it that way, honey." She started humming a tune I didn't recognize, then stopped abruptly and went silent. The air in the truck felt thick and suffocating. I watched the mile markers pass, counting down. 7 miles, 6 miles. She took another drink from the flask. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. When I saw a sign for a rest area 2 miles ahead, I made a decision. I told her, "Actually, can you drop me at that rest stop? My friend just texted, they're picking me up there." It was a complete lie. My phone was still dead in my pocket. She looked at me with suspicion. "I thought you said you needed to get to town." I fumbled for an explanation, said my friend had been trying to reach me and finally got through, didn't want to make them drive all the way into town. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fine." Her voice was flat. She took the exit and pulled into the rest area parking lot. There were a few other cars there, a couple of trucks. She stopped near the building. I grabbed my backpack and said thanks, reaching for the door handle. Her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist hard enough that it hurt. "You're not going to tell anyone about me, are you?" Her eyes were locked on mine. I shook my head quickly and said no, I was just grateful for the ride. She held my wrist for another few seconds, then slowly released it. "Good." I opened the door, climbed out, and closed it. She didn't drive away immediately. She sat there watching me through the windshield. I walked toward the rest area building, forcing myself not to run. When I finally heard the truck engine rev and looked back, she was pulling away slowly, still watching me in her side mirror. I waited until her taillights disappeared completely before I let myself breathe. My legs were shaking. I went inside and found a payphone, called a friend to come get me. 3 years went by. I almost never thought about that night anymore. It became one of those weird stories you tell at parties sometimes, but it didn't haunt me. Life moved on. Then one morning I was sitting in my apartment drinking coffee and scrolling through news on my laptop. A headline caught my eye. "Woman arrested in connection with 3 missing persons cases in New Mexico." I clicked on it. Police had arrested a 43-year-old woman suspected in the disappearances of 3 people over the past 5 years. Investigators found evidence in her pickup truck and home. The article said she had a pattern of picking up hitchhikers. One potential victim had escaped recently and reported her to police, leading to the arrest. I scrolled down to see if there was a photo. When it loaded, everything stopped. Blonde hair, same hard face, same flat eyes. It was her. The woman who'd given me a ride 3 years ago. I read the rest of the article twice. All three victims were young women in their 20s who'd been hitchhiking. Authorities found personal belongings from the missing women in her vehicle and in a storage unit she rented. I sat there staring at the screen, my coffee getting cold. I called the police department in New Mexico that afternoon, told them about my experience 3 years earlier, gave them the exact date and location as best as I could remember. The officer who took my statement said they'd note it in the file and contact me if they needed more information. A few weeks later, a detective called me back. She confirmed it was the same woman. They'd found even more evidence since the arrest. The detective said I was lucky. When I asked why she'd let me go, the detective said they weren't entirely sure. Maybe because there were other people at the rest area. Maybe I wasn't her preferred target for some reason. Or maybe she just had a moment of hesitation. I thanked her and hung up. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that call, thinking about the black bag in the back seat of her truck, about the way she'd grabbed my wrist, about how close I'd come to being one of those missing persons cases. I've never hitchhiked again. I won't even pick up hitchhikers myself. And whenever I see a dark blue pickup on the highway, I still feel a chill run down my spine. Sometimes luck is just a matter of a few minutes, a few miles, the presence of other people nearby. I got out with nothing more than a story to tell. 3 other women weren't that lucky. I think about them sometimes, about how easily I could have been one of them. That's what stays with me most. Not the fear I felt that night, but the thin line between getting home safe and never being seen again.